All right, we got to thank Sarah for that help. We were able to figure it out a little bit, and so let's get back to it. Now that we got that counter argument flushed out, I think I have the idea of like the strategy is to move from those three things. I'm thankful this guy challenged it. Todd Wilson, good job, challenger. If I was there, I'd nail it to that stapler to the ground exactly on one of those, and then just belabor the point like a mofo. Because I hate people who go around in these like little circular things, like and to run out the clock.
Well, I mean, the question is not. The question is, one can take something that's got non-Christian origins and appropriate it. It's not that you should do that with everything that's non-Christian. Some non-Christian things are dopey and have no value, and I would put astrology in that bucket. But evolutionary biology, yoga, psychology, economics. I mean, I went to Wheaton College, a Christian liberal arts college. We studied every discipline from a Christian perspective. The vast majority of the things we studied come from non-Christians and have like, Charles Darwin. I don't know, he kind of lost his faith. Evolution's been really bad, but can Christians appropriate that as a way of thinking about the origins of organic life? I think so. I think so. Can they do it in a way that undermines their faith? Yes, that would be a problem. But putting it in a God-centered perspective, yeah, for sure. But that may be a fundamental, let me just say here, Justin, that may be a fundamental difference. Is it would be interesting to know, Marcia, like what you do with, let's say, evolutionary biology, for example, like whether that's something that a Christian can take into a God-centered worldview or not, or is that would that
Okay,
be like hostile to the Christian faith, for
here's my
example?
answer.
Because I think it hermeneutically is the same
My
issue.
answer would be it has to be based on valid scientific data. So, and I'm not going to discuss evolution, but anything that a Christian can appropriate needs to be based on objective truth. It needs to be based on objective truth. The Enneagram is not, just like astrology. So the Enneagram is as valid as astrology. They both fall in the same category. And in fact, Jay Medenwald, in his article on the Enneagram, in part two of it, when he writes about why people believe the Enneagram is accurate, he says it works the same way as astrology. So there's no validity. It's not like it's some kind of time tested tool.
Yo, I just thought of a sick argument. I just thought of a sick argument. Woo! All right, I'm gonna rewind this. I'm gonna share it with Sarah because I'm so excited about this. I'm being corny, but whatever. I'm gonna share this with her. We're gonna back up a little bit. Appreciate it.
Look at it, or can I
You
leave
can
it?
just listen. You can listen. You know, it's like this is my counter because this is actually pretty interesting. So he says, he says it's not that it's not saying that Christians should reappropriate things. I'm asking if Christians can reappropriate things as her counter argument to her because she's getting into the specifics about the Enneagram, which is not to address the actual abstraction of the genetic fallacy itself. So can Christians reappropriate things in general? Can that be done? Which I thought was a great counter argument. Let's listen to this. Like, watch what happens.
Like hostile to the Christian faith, for
Here's my
example.
answer.
Because I think it hermeneutically is the same issue.
My answer would be it has to be based on valid scientific data. So, and I'm not going to discuss evolution, but anything that a Christian can appropriate needs to be based on objective truth. It needs to be based on objective truth. The Enneagram is not, just like astrology. So the Enneagram is as valid as astrology. They both fall in the same category. And in fact, Jay Medenwald, in his article on the Enneagram, in part two of it, when he writes about why people believe the Enneagram is accurate, he says it works the same way as astrology. So there's no...
Before you do that, but listen to her. This is my counter argument to that. This is what I would do. And I just came. That's why I'm very. I was like watching it. See, I know. I just came up with this just now. And you tell me if you're impressed with it. Marcia Montenegro, you say that a Christian can reappropriate things if they come from objective scientific facts. Is the claim that Christians can only reappropriate things from objective scientific facts itself an objective scientific fact? Because you just made a claim that is not based on objective scientific fact. It's your own perspective. the perspective itself, like you have put scientific fact on this pedestal that isn't getting the height of the pedestal from the scriptures themselves or from Christianity, right? Right. So why is science being put that high, Marcia Montenegro? It may work because people want to feel esteemed for their ideas, and that's what people in our general population and culture that we esteem science. So it's safe because you have the consensus on your side, right? Oh yeah, science, yeah, of course, yeah, we all believe in science. However, that's the consensus theory of truth, probably for you, not a scientific fact. The fact that scientific facts are paramount is not a scientific fact. It is itself a lens in which you view the world. So the argument is self-defeating. I hope he says that. I don't even know what he says as a response, but I hope he says that because that would be a great counter argument to her.
No validity. It's not like it's some kind of time-tested tool that has been used on the secular world and recognized as a valid tool. It's never been recognized as a valid tool.
Let's come back to that in a moment.
Okay.
Marcia.
Dude, okay, so what do you think about this? Do you think the possibility is that her main modality is that she vacillates between it's evil, it's fake, it's evil, it's not real, it's evil, it's not valid? Like, that's what she does? Because that's the pattern that I'm getting so far. Is like, yeah, I will see if she does that. If she just kind of like moves between those two poles consistently, that would be interesting.
Montenegro and Todd Wilson are joining me on today's show. We're asking, should Christians embrace the Enneagram? We've already got a feisty debate on our hands, which we like here and unbelievable. And we'll be back in a moment's time to continue the discussion. Todd, first of all, so quite a number of criticisms from Marcia, particularly obviously that whole occult sort of origins thing. I mean, I've got to confess, even I, not knowing much about the Enneagram, it kind of sounds kind of a bit weird, a bit like the word pentagram. It's got a similar kind of look to the shape that you typically gets associated with it, these nine-pointed symbol. So it's kind of natural, even for someone who hasn't done the research Marcia has, for someone to be a bit like, "Ooh, I'm not too sure about this whole thing."
Yes.
So we should tread carefully, right? I mean, there's no harm.
Absolutely.
So, but what convinces you that the benefits outweigh the potential concerns here? Presumably, you've seen some really transformative effects when you have used it.
Yeah. I mean, let me just affirm, Justin and Marcia, that I agree entirely that if Christians in an irresponsible way grab hold of the local Enneagram New Age teacher's version of the Enneagram and just, take it hook, line, and sinker, that can be quite deleterious to their faith and unhelpful. You can smuggle in, per your point, Trojan horse ways of thinking about human nature and the divine and 1,000 other things. So I'm not at all a fan of that. I'm also not trying to say the New Age drenched version of the Enneagram is fine for Christians to use. I'm not saying that at all. Just like I wouldn't say Christians can go to a yoga studio and do a bunch of New Agey yoga and think it's great too. I mean, that's you could appropriate yoga for good exercise, but you would want to do that in a responsible way. So I just want to fully affirm the anxiety about the Enneagram and the hesitation about the Enneagram. My only thing is, I think we all would agree, personality is a real thing. There is such a thing as personality. I think there's no reason to question that. That's a little different than astrology, right? That the movement of planets has some direct correlation. And Marcia, I see you shaking your head. Perhaps I don't understand astrology, so I'm happy for you to correct me on this. But my point is, it is widespread, universally agreed that personality is a real thing, right? That's not like some debatable New Age idea. Then the question is, like, how can we get access to that and the differences in personality? We can use lots of things. There are lots of the big five and, things that have, to Marcia's point earlier, a little more validity and reliability. They've stood up under scientific testing and rigor. That's great. And use the big five, use that kind of stuff, use Myers-Briggs, although there's some question about is that as scientifically valid. That's all fine. for me, the Enneagram doesn't have, at least it doesn't yet have, the kind of validity and reliability, scrutiny, and testing. It may. I do know some pretty well regarded psychologists and psychiatrists that are using it. For example, Dan Siegel, the kind of nationally famous, at least in America, Harvard trained UCLA psychologist, written any number of books, who is currently working on a book on the Enneagram and has been a big fan of it. Or David Daniels, who taught at Stanford for any number of years, who's a huge fan of the Enneagram and said, in my 50-year clinical practice, nothing has even gotten half as helpful and powerful as the Enneagram. So these are highly regarded psychologists, psychiatrists who have appropriated the Enneagram, though it is true, it doesn't have the same sort of scientific rigor. But here's what I say in the book, Justin. I say, I don't try to make the argument that the Enneagram has validity and reliability, therefore, because it's got scientific bona fides, Christians should use it. I sidestep that and say the Enneagram is a wisdom tradition. It's a stockpile of wise insights into how human beings work. And just like the book of Proverbs doesn't have scientific reliability and validity, and yet it's still incredibly helpful for living, so too the Enneagram, as a wisdom tradition, is just that. And like I said earlier,
Thank you. Now, I hope she engages Proverbs. Something I'm excited. Let's do this.
I don't know really anybody who has worn the Enneagram, as it were, taken it on as a hypothesis and worked with it for a month or two and really kind of explored it, who hasn't come away thinking to themselves, that is incredibly insightful to human behavior.
I think in a way then, Marcia, it's a sort of all truth is God's truth. And yes, we don't have to accept everything from its origins and the way other people use it, but it works and it's insightful and therefore, appropriated correctly and in a biblical way. It is a tool that God has given us, in a sense.
Yeah, but here's the
seems
problem.
to be Todd's argument.
If I could go ahead and respond, because there's several things I want to respond to.
Sure.
First of all, it's not truth. That's the problem. It's not based on any truth. The types came through automatic writing, which is a form of spirit contact. That's where the 9 types came from, and they didn't.
This is interesting because she said it's not truth, and then her argument was another genetic fallacy. Three prongs, like it's like 3 things wrong. Like genetic fallacy. Oh well, it's invalid. No, genetic fallacy. There's other arguments, vague other arguments. Well, it's invalid. And then genetic fallacy. He just argued against the truthfulness of it, because he's saying, oh, it has truth. All truth is God's truth. There's science behind it, or it works, right? No, he doesn't say it doesn't. Not that it doesn't have science against for it, but there is some science, at least possibly out of it with whatever Dan Siegel, and it works. Genetic fallacy, it comes from bad origins. And then there's other arguments, so it's not just genetic fallacy. It's like a circular, or maybe even just 2. I'm not sure if there's 3 prongs to that the repeating nature of this, or whether there's just 2.
Didn't appear until around 1970, 1971 through Claudio Naranjo. So when Todd says a wisdom tradition, there's no basis for calling it a wisdom tradition. The types have existed for 50 years, and they came from spirit contact. They were developed in the New Age. They weren't developed under any rigorous testing. The 2 psychologists he mentioned, Dan Siegel and David Daniels, are into the New Age. Well, David Daniels is dead. He worked for years and years with Helen Palmer, who was the psychic who brought the Enneagram into the New Age. She no longer calls herself a psychic. She's sort of reinvented herself, like a lot of New Agers, into this kind of counseling guru. But she is 100% New Age. And this is who David Daniels worked with. And I read a little bit of what he's written, and it's very New Age oriented. Now, was he a complete New Ager? I don't know, but he was definitely open to the New Age. He was also a psychiatrist, and I've been told.
I forgot that. I said, damn, she's rambling a lot. I forgot to unmute myself. But now I see why she wouldn't want to do these conversations, because, well, she's been isolated enough to where she isn't used to actually having to engage in like little, you say something, I say something, you say something in the discussion. She's just used to like, let me just go on and on and on and fill up the time. And rambles. And I'm gonna bring up something on the whole history thing. I'm gonna bring up something on the origins. Let me see. I'm gonna minimize this. Let me pull up. Let me do this. Let me do. Boom.
Told that psychiatrists really aren't that up on personality tests and things like that. That's not their area of expertise. And I also want to mention the fact that about personality, the reason that no personality tests are really considered valid in psychology is because it's this very ephemeral thing, and it's very shifting and changing. So they say, for example, you can take the Myers-Briggs, and then 5 years from now, when you take it, you could come out in a completely different categories. So you change over time, because personality is not necessarily a fixed thing. And then of course, it's going to depend on how you define it. But generally speaking, we don't, as Christians, we don't want to see ourselves as a personality. We want to see ourselves in terms of character. And
Oh man, I just realized I was muted this whole time. Okay, so listen to this real quick.
we want to see ourselves, and generally speaking, we don't, as Christians, we don't want to see ourselves in terms of personality. We want to see ourselves in terms of character.
As if the personality is the false self. Then we said that in the beginning, like, no, it's Enneagram isn't about personality. It's about ridding yourself of this false self. And then she just said that the false self is the personality.